And Israel's war in Gaza is reaching a grim new milestone. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health says the death toll has reached 40,000 and more than 92,000 people have been injured. It also says 85% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million has been displaced from their homes. This as high-stakes talks are underway in Qatar for a ceasefire and hostage deal. The governments of Qatar, Egypt, Israel, and the United States are all there, but Hamas says it will not participate. ABC News foreign correspondent Tom Soufi-Burridge joins me now from Tel Aviv, Israel, and ABC's contributor, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, retired Army Lieutenant General Doug Lute, joins me with more on this as well. Tom, the Hamas-run Health Ministry is reporting these 40,000 deaths in Gaza. So what does that do in terms of pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to try to reach a deal in these peace talks?
I think, Diana, it ups the international pressure on Israel because it draws once again into sharp focus the human suffering in Gaza today. But I don't think it necessarily alters the negotiating position of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team going into these key talks. I mean, look, within that 40,000 killed, according to the Hamas-run Health Ministry figure, they're saying about 11,000 children are included in that statistic. And look, I've spoken to aid agencies on the ground in Gaza multiple occasions throughout this war. And on certain occasions, American humanitarian workers have told me that children are disproportionately affected because, you know, they're smaller, they're closer to the ground, you've got high explosives being used. And they do just, anecdotally, if you're in a hospital in Gaza, you see children coming in with horrific wounds on a regular basis. And the videos coming out of Gaza in the last 24 hours speak to that, which I've watched. We've spoken to Casey Harity. She's from Wyoming. She works for Save the Children International. She spoke about the suffering of children to me. And I also asked her why a ceasefire in Gaza is really needed right now.
Now, Doug, the CIA director, Bill Burns, is at these talks in Qatar, but notably Hamas is not, at least not directly. So what are the main U.S. objectives here?
Well, first, the talks have always been proximity talks. That means that the multiple parties are not all in the same room at the same time. I think the convening, the hosting by Qatar simply gives us a venue for the talks where Bill Burns will represent the United States. Look, the U.S. objectives here are quite clear. First of all, attain an agreement that limits or ends the humanitarian situation that we just described on the ground, and bring the conflict in Gaza to a ceasefire and a place where the hostages can be exchanged. So that's the immediate objective. But looming behind that immediate objective are two others. First of all, the challenge of the expected Iranian counterstrike on Israel and trying to contain the situation so that escalation does not spin out of control. And then even beyond that looms another U.S. objective, and that is the still potential agreement between the U.S., Israel, and the Saudi government to normalize relations in the region between the Saudis and the Israelis. So there's a lot at stake here.
Now, Tom, there right now are internal divisions within Netanyahu's own cabinet about how this war ends. So how is Israel approaching these talks to try to reach a deal with Hamas if they're not even in agreement within their own cabinet?
There are big internal divisions within the government and within Israeli society about what should happen. One of those major sticking points or points of discussion is whether or not you can claim total victory in Gaza, whether you can still further degrade Hamas, whether that actually achieves anything, or whether really the hostages at the end of the war should be prioritized over all else. I mean, look, the Israeli government are going into these negotiations like Hamas, although Hamas are not formally there, but the caveat to that is that it's Doha. There are a lot of Hamas officials in Doha, and Qatar effectively represent Hamas's position in these talks. The two sides are both going into these talks trying to get a deal on their terms. The question is, on the major sticking points, and one major sticking point, we're seeing divisions in Israel, within the government, even between potentially the top brass of the IDF and Prime Minister Netanyahu's team, is what would happen to Israeli troops if there were a ceasefire? Would they have to fully withdraw from strategically important areas of Gaza? And we heard from the head of the IDF hinting in a statement last night saying, well, actually, if the government went for the option where we weren't fully out of we were fully out of those areas, we could still raid into areas, we could still reach any part of the Gaza Strip in a short amount of time to potentially take out Hamas operatives. So, look, that's the debate that's playing out. We're watching these talks, 2 days of talks in Qatar, the US really driving this process, but at the moment, the omens are not looking good for a breakthrough on those critical issues.
All right, Tom Soufi Burridge, Doug Lute, thank you both.